Welcome back, everybody, to the Between the Word podcast. My name is Nathan Holliday, and today we're going to be reading Genesis chapter 18. So I hope you're looking forward to it, and we'll dive right into it now. Genesis chapter 18. And the Lord appeared to him in the vale of Mamre, as he was sitting at the door of his tent, in the very heat of the day. And when he had lifted up his eyes, there appeared to him 3 men standing near him. And as soon as he saw them, he ran to meet them from the door of his tent, and adored down to the ground. And he said, Lord, if I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away from thy servant. But I will fetch a little water, and wash ye your feet, and rest ye under the tree. And I will set a morsel of bread, and strengthen ye your heart. Afterwards you shall pass on, for therefore are you come aside to your servant. And they said, Do as thou hast spoken. Abraham made haste into the tent to Sara, and said to her, Make haste, temper together 3 measures of flour, and make cakes upon the hearth. And he himself ran to the herd, and took from thence a calf very tender and very good, and gave it to a young man, who made haste and boiled it. He took also butter and bread, and the calf which he had boiled, and set before them, but he stood by them under the tree. And when they had eaten, they said to him, Where is Sara thy wife? He answered, Lo, she is in the tent. And he said to him, I will return and come to thee at this time, life accompanying, and Sara thy wife shall have a son. Which when Sara heard, she laughed behind the door of the tent. Now they were both old, and far advanced in years, and it had ceased to be with Sara after the manner of women. And she laughed secretly, saying, After I am grown old, and my Lord is an old man, shall I give myself to pleasure? And the Lord said to Abraham, Why did Sara laugh, saying, Shall I, who am an old woman, bear a child indeed? Is there anything hard to God? According to appointment I will return to thee at this same time, life accompanying, and Sara shall have a son. Sara denied, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. But the Lord said, Nay, but thou didst laugh. And when the men rose up from thence, they turned their eyes toward Sodom, and Abraham walked with them, bringing them on the way. And the Lord said, Can I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing he shall become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth shall be blessed? For I know that he will command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord, and do judgment and justice, that for Abraham's sake the Lord may bring to effect all the things he hath spoken unto him. And the Lord said, The cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is multiplied, and their sin is become exceedingly grievous. I will go down and see whether they have done according to that cry that is come to me, or whether it be not so, that I may know. And they turned themselves from thence, and went their way to Sodom. But Abraham as yet stood before the Lord. And drawing nigh he said, Wilt thou destroy the just with the wicked? If there be 50 just men in the city, shall they perish withal? And wilt thou not spare that place for the sake of the 50 just, if they be therein? Far be it from thee to do this thing, and to slay the just with the wicked, and for the just to be in like case as the wicked. This is not beseeming thee. Thou who judgest all the earth will not make this judgment. And the Lord said to him, If I find in Sodom 50 just within the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. And Abraham answered and said, Seeing I have once begun, I will speak to my Lord, whereas I am dust and ashes. What if there be 5 less than 50 just persons? Wilt thou for 45 destroy the whole city? And he said, I will not destroy it, if I find 45. And again he said to him, But if the 40 be found there, what wilt thou do? He said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 40. The Lord saith, Be not angry, I beseech thee, if I speak. What if 30 shall be found there? He answered, I will not do it, if I find 30 there. Seeing, saith he, I have once begun, I will speak to my Lord. What if 20 be found there? He said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 20. I beseech thee, saith he, be not angry. Lord, if I speak yet once more, what if 10 should be found there? And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. And the Lord departed after he had left speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. Okay, let's start the Genesis chapter 18 reflection period. So verse 4, this is where it's talking about Abraham washing the feet of his 3 guests. These 3 guests or visitors, they are commonly thought of as 2 angels and then also the Lord. Some sort of representation of the Lord for Abraham. So this is an example where we see the importance of hospitality, especially in the Old Testament. And this is a reoccurring theme even up through the New Testament. So Abraham, he kind of takes on this role of servant for his guests. And this is, to make them feel welcomed. So Abraham, in this situation, he's humbling himself. He's putting himself kind of below his guests, if you will, even though he is the host. And then, it's also important to note that just for sanitary reasons, back then, people, they were used to walking very long distances and on dusty roads, and they were wearing sandals. So, over time, their feet would get really dirty. So it was important to, be washing your feet and make sure that you're keeping them clean because they were exposed to a lot more of the environment. Whereas today, obviously, we have things like socks, sneakers, so our feet aren't maybe as exposed to the ground, but not saying that they don't get dirty. They still get dirty. You should still wash them. But yeah, so for sanitary reasons as well, it was important to be washing your feet. And then obviously later on we'll even see Jesus, washing the feet of his apostles. So, that kind of servant role, that's the role we should be taking on. Verse 10, this is where Sara, she is once again told that she's going to bear a child. But then this time, when she's told, she laughs. She actually starts laughing when she hears this. And I think that's kind of funny because, it's, to me, that feels like a very honest reaction from her. She's probably thinking to herself, oh, here we go again. How many times have I been told this? Oh, you're going to bear a child, and, it just hasn't happened yet. And that's got to be tough as well, that it hasn't happened yet. So she kind of laughs it off a little bit because it kind of seems absurd at this point. She's getting old, and, she's gotten so old to the point where it just seems extremely unlikely that that would be happening. But then right after she laughs, God quickly reminds her that, there's nothing that he can't do. He says, I believe he even says, is anything hard for the Lord? Something along those lines. Yeah, he literally says, is there anything hard to God? So, despite her age, it's not difficult for God to do this for her, and he said he's going to do it, and God is true to his word, so it will happen. But, it's just a very human reaction from Sara. Verse 20, this is where we see that Sodom and Gomorrah, they have reached this point of no return, basically. And to me, this kind of point of no return, it might be kind of a sort of microcosm of the earth before the flood. It's just been filled with sin, and And it's just gotten so bad, exceedingly grievous, to the point where, it's time for it to be destroyed because no good is going to come out of it. So sin has just run rampant throughout Sodom and Gomorrah, and the Lord says that it's going to be destroyed. So Abraham, he starts to ask God questions then after God tells him what's going to happen to those cities. So Abraham, he wants to know, well, okay, if there's 50 just men in the city, will they be saved? Because why should the 50 just men die with the rest of them? And then God, he kind of comes back to Abraham and he does him one better, and he says, if there are 50 just men, not only will I save those 50 just men, but I will save the entire city. So the city will not be judged on that day. And then Abraham responds to God and then asks, well, what about 45? And he begins this negotiating, this kind of back and forth with God, until eventually Abraham gets God all the way down to 10. If there's 10 just men in the city of Sodom or Gomorrah, then the cities shall not be destroyed. So Abraham, he's wrestling with God in that situation, and he wants the cities to be saved. And God agrees. He agrees with this negotiation. They get down to 10, and if there's 10, the city will not be destroyed. And then God departs. So there's a few things, or maybe even many things, that this negotiating between Abraham and God may represent for us today. So it could show, the potential lengths that God is willing to go to try to extend mercy to us sinners. That's one example, because, he starts at this higher bar and his mercy is just so great, it gets further and further down until it's like, I almost can't be more merciful. Like, I'm trying everything. It also may show how we are to wrestle with God and trying to understand him and trying to understand his mercy. But I'll take this time to talk about how Abraham, he's asking God for something. He wants something from God. He's trying to ask God to spare the city. That's what he wants. And I believe that people, they kind of go back and forth on this, but, whether or not it's appropriate to just be asking God for something in prayer. So this is a fine line to toe between, just constantly asking God for things and kind of treating him as some sort of ATM machine in prayer versus, being too afraid to ask for anything at all. So, we don't want to just continuously take, and but we also don't want to be afraid to ask for things. So in fact, it's actually a part of God's plan that we will ask him for things. So if we don't engage with God, then we're actually preventing ourselves from the outpouring of graces that he wishes to bestow upon us. So with that in mind, I believe that we should be asking him for things, because he is our Father, and he will come back with an answer for us. We are told that, ask and you shall receive. Like that's what we're told. If you ask, then you will receive. But I think it's important, however, to not twist this into thinking that if we ask, then we will receive exactly what we asked for. Instead, we will receive exactly what God knows we need to receive. So this is important to understand because all of our prayers are answered. It's just that sometimes they're not answered in the way that we would like them to be. Or maybe they're not answered in the way that we would expect them to be answered. Sometimes we might get exactly what we prayed for. We might get some sort of clear answer. Sometimes maybe we'll get a change in direction. God's trying to maybe guide us in a different area that we weren't originally going to in our prayer. Or maybe sometimes we'll even just receive silence. But no matter what the answer is, it's always the answer that we need in our prayer. So all of these things, these are all answers that guide us down the path that God is trying to reveal to us, essentially. So, I would say, like, please ask God for things, because you're supposed to, but do your due diligence. Discern to yourself exactly what it is that you should be asking God for. And, in fact, ask God, hey, what is it that I should be asking for in this moment? Is there something I'm missing? What would be of most benefit for me to ask for right now? And then also, don't ask God for some material good that's going to have like no positive effect on your spiritual well-being. So don't just ask God like, oh, I'd really like a Ferrari right now. Like that'd be so good. Like I need it. I need that Ferrari. Um, Not that owning a Ferrari or having one is necessarily a bad thing, but it's most unlikely that God is going to somehow use a Ferrari to just massively increase your spiritual well-being. Not saying he couldn't, but I think, we're asked to go a little bit deeper than that. If you know God, you know that you're called to dive deeper than just that surface level, like, oh, I want $1 million right now. Ask him for things like guidance in your vocation or health and safety or grace for others. And maybe ask him, what are ways that, God, what are ways that you can use me to be, a servant for your kingdom on earth? These are all common things that I try to ask in my prayer. And I think they are pretty good things to be asking for. But, I think we should just continually ask God, hey, like what kind of graces are you trying to give me in this moment? And what is it that I could be doing best for you right now? And what could I be doing better? What are ways that I could be doing better? And what ways am I doing okay right now? And what ways are you happy with how things are going? So God, he wants you to ask him for things because he wants to provide. He wants to provide for his children. He is our Father, and he wants to provide you in the ways that will serve you best in your life. So, those are the kinds of things that I think, we should be wrestling with God and negotiating with God in the way that Abraham negotiates down the number of people, the number of just people in Sodom and Gomorrah. He found this thing, and God determined that Abraham is asking for a good thing, and this is a good thing for him to be asking, and so God, he goes back and forth with him on it, and that's how Abraham was answered. So just like that, we should try and go back and forth with God and try to hear what he is telling us, even if it's not what you initially thought you wanted. So feel free to leave a comment down below and maybe, share what are some ways that God has answered a prayer that, maybe it was in a way that you didn't expect, or a way that, was extremely beneficial, but, you weren't anticipating that. You weren't anticipating that sort of response. Or, maybe share, what's a way God has called you down a new path, a path that you weren't originally heading down, and then after prayer with God, you kind of were redirected. I'd love to hear how God is working in each of your lives. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope it was beneficial and worth your time. And once again, I appreciate your time. So until next episode, my name is Nathan Holliday. Thank you for joining the Between the Word podcast, and I'll see you next time.